everyone. This week we're going to be going through the process of setting up a simple CSS file for styling the HTML file that we built last time. So last week's work I've left in a folder here called Session 1. The code for that is up on Blackboard under Learning Materials for Session 1. And I've just made a copy of that folder and called it Session 2. All right, so I'm leaving that one intact and going on working in this one, making the changes. Okay, so what we have here, of course, two HTML pages. We have a home page, which always has to be called index.html. We have a second page called about.html. Again, those file names are all in lowercase with no spaces. Ditto for the folders here. So we've got the folder that we made last time called CSS. That's where we'll be putting our style sheets. And we've got a folder for images as well when we get to that. We'll be looking at that more next week. Okay, so this is where we left it last week. We had basically a very simple little website consisting only of HTML with unstyled content and a very basic sort of navigation bar up here, just thinking from the home page and that second page about the about page, which is this one here that we have called about.html. So this is what unstyled HTML looks like. As you can see, it doesn't look particularly attractive, and from a graphic design point of view, it's not very good. We have, for example, these lines that tend to be too long. And if I make the browser window wider, you can see that the measure there is really ridiculous. Okay. The reason that's bad from a design point of view is because a long line of text like this is harder to read. Typically you want maybe 10 to 12 words or about 80 characters for a line as a maximum. So correcting things like that at the very least, as well as much more finely tuned and sophisticated layout, is the kind of thing that we use CSS for, cascading style sheets. So that's what we're going to be doing now. All right, so let's hop into Visual Studio Code, our code editor that we're using. And I've already got my web folder set up here. You might want to work out of the same folder as last time. Probably not a bad idea at this point at any rate. Though saving multiple versions of your work is a good idea. All right, so let's have a look at this. We've got our, if I open up index.html, again, you can see we've got our basic code here. We've got the doc type declaration, the HTML opening and closing tags here, the head section containing our title. All right, at this stage, it only contains the title. And we've got the body section. And here's our navigation stuff here, the nav tag. All right, I've got a heading, a paragraph or two, level 2 heading, an H2 heading, another paragraph. All right, so let's start off by making a CSS file, which we will keep inside the CSS folder. I'm just going to call it styles.css. It's fairly obvious and a pretty good and a good name for a style sheet. So here we go. Let's just go under the, so it's just going under the file menu and choosing new file. And I'm going to enter this in here, styles.css. So again, all lowercase, this time with a CSS file extension here, .css. All right. CSS is a distinct language from HTML, and we use those two languages together, but the way that they function, the way that they look is really very, very different. So I'm just going to hit enter here. It's prompting me where I want to save it, and I want to save it here in the CSS folder. So let's just hit that. Okay, so again, got an empty CSS file here. All right, let's flick back just to the minute to the HTML page. All right, let's start off just by doing a couple of things. One of which would be to put a background color. I'll attach that. I'm going to attach that actually to the body tag itself. All right. There are a couple of different ways I could do that, but this will, I think, will demonstrate the way that you can style an HTML element directly itself. The body, of course, contains all of our content that we see on screen, but we can style it in itself. We could also attach what we would call a CSS class here as well, or instead, probably do one or the other, not both. Okay, so let's hop over to our styles.css page, and I'm going to just type in the word body, right? It's the word body on its own, and put in some angle brackets here. So switch English input on my keyboard. So we have these braces here, the curly brackets rather, not angle brackets. Hit return, and the actual content of the style definition goes in here. All right. So I'm going to put in what's called a CSS selector. So a CSS selector is something that controls the appearance, or in many ways the behavior too, of an element or CSS class which we might apply to an HTML element. Okay, so let's give this a background, a simple background color. Let's, for now, just give it a yellow background. All right. So this is the sort of basic syntax that we have here. We have the name of the tag that I'm styling, the body tag or the body element, and we have this word here, background, followed by a colon, those two dots above each other. And here I've just typed in the word yellow. That little yellow box there is actually provided by Visual Studio Code. It's not, strictly speaking, part of the CSS. In fact, it is not part of the CSS itself. It's just a little affordance that Visual Studio Code is giving me. And then I finished that line with a semicolon. All right? That's because typically our definitions for these styles are going to consist of multiple lines, and the web browser, whether it's Safari or Chrome or whatever, needs to have a way of distinguishing between one line and the next. It could actually all be on one line, just as with HTML. All right, so let's leave that there. Let's say background yellow. All right, so far this is not going to make any change to the web page itself because we haven't linked the two together. In order to load that CSS file, styles.css, which we have here, into the web page, we will need a link tag. As I've mentioned previously, the link tag can be a little bit of a false friend. It's not the one that's used for linking between web pages. All right, the correct one for that is the one we used this last time, the A tag or the anchor tag. All right. The link tag instead is used to load things into a web page, such as the CSS file that we've just started making. All right, so we start off with the word link. The next attribute that we need is href. All right, so this is actually the same attribute as we have in the anchor tag. So there's that similarity. Href, of course, stands for hypertext reference. Okay, so that's linking to connecting to another document. Now, we can't simply put styles.css in there. All right, that won't work. The reason that won't work is because our actual styles.css file is within another folder. If we come back to the Finder, can see that it's in here inside a folder called CSS. Okay, so this keeps things nice and organized. But it does mean that we need to take an extra step. It's perhaps not obvious. All right. So when we linked in the navigation section between these two web pages last time, these two files, the index.html file and the about.html file, you can see that they're in the same folder. They're at the same level, we can say. All right. In this instance, we're wanting to load this CSS file up a level into the index.html file. Or another way of looking at it is saying we need to tell the web browser, okay, once you're in index.html, go down a level into this folder called CSS and grab this file, styles.css. All right, so let's have a look at how we do that. I'll just make sure that our web page is visible over here. All right, so what we need to do is to say, look inside that folder called CSS. So we put that in, CSS. We also need to put in this separator here, the /. Okay. And in fact, Visual Studio Code, because it is looking at the folder that we're working out of, if I just type in CSS and a /, you can see that it prompts me here saying, oh, do you want this file, styles.css? I'm just going to hit return, and boom, it puts that in there. All right. That'll be enough for it actually to work. I'm going to put in another attribute, the rel attribute, and just to make it a little bit clearer for the poor computer, they're not very bright things after all, that it is actually a style sheet. Okay. Now, the link tag is one of those rare tags that does not have a closing tag. So we could just put a right angle bracket there, and that would be closed. I like to, especially for my students' sake, like to do this. Just put a / there. Again, that / is really echoing this / in closing HTML tag. Okay, there was many years ago a proposed HTML standard that required you to close HTML self-closing HTML tags in this way, to put a / there. All right. That standard never really took off, but I've always thought that that was very nice, a very elegant little reminder. This tag does not have a closing tag. Okay, so that's what that's about there. All right, so just to go over that again, we have the link tag for loading resources. We have the href attribute, hypertext reference attribute, href equals, and then we have the name of the folder, a /, which is telling the web browser here to look inside that folder and to load styles.css. So that / just means look inside the folder in this context. All right. So hopefully, fingers crossed, when we come back over to Safari here, and you can see I'm in Safari. Let's set so up here in the top left. When I reload that with the reload button, boom, we get a yellow background, as you would expect. Okay, so that's how we start building out CSS styles for our page. All right. So you might remember from our previous code as well that the initial presentation that we can, of course, define our own CSS classes. Okay, so I'm going to do that here. I'm going to put a class, a CSS class attribute on this H1 top level heading here. So I'm just going to come in here, just type in the word class, then class equals, and I'm going to put in the name of a CSS class. Now I haven't written this CSS class yet. What do I call it? I'll call it heading -- main. All right, so that's a good name because I might have multiple styles for headings of various kinds, and I want to indicate that it's a main heading. All right. So I'm just going, and I'm just, for sake of readability, just spacing that out a little bit with 2 dashes. Okay. So what this will do is that I can take, in fact, I'm just going to copy this, but that class name I actually need to define in my CSS file now, so I can use that. Now, because unlike this definition for the body tag, right, that's actually the name of an HTML element. So I just put the name of that element in there, just like that, just plonk it in there. If I were defining something for the all H1 elements, I would define it like this. Okay, I would just put in H1 there in the definition. There's nothing wrong with that in principle, but I'm going to make, as I say, a particular class here. So I'm going to call it, as I say, heading dash dash main. But here's a difference. Because I'm defining a CSS class, I have to start the name of that class with a full stop. Full stop, then the name of the class. Okay. And in here, I can put in how I want that to appear. All right. So just to come back to the HTML file for a moment, note that I do not put that full stop in here in the class attribute on that actual H1 tag. So H1 class equals, and then I have that class name there. All right. Okay, so let's define the color for that text. Now, the word color here, okay, only refers to the color of text. So I'm going to put in the word red. Here we can define colors in much more sophisticated ways, and we will, but this will do for now for demonstration purposes. Color red, and what else will I do? I'm going to put in another attribute. I'm going to choose this one here, text transform. Okay, text transform. And I'm going to choose this option, uppercase. Right. So Visual Studio Code is giving me little prompts as I type this, and I'm just selecting from them. I could just type all these words out directly. All right, so let's come back over here to the web browser and hit reload and see what happens. Boom. You can see that the heading now is in red, and it's been transformed to all uppercase. All right. Let's go on. Oops. So we can go on building out our various styles here. The bright yellow and the bright red, probably a bit too much. Aesthetically, I suppose it could be a certain aesthetic, maybe not, for what we're doing. But this is essentially the process. Generally speaking, we want to make our own CSS classes like we did here and apply them to HTML elements, like so.